Last week, if you remember, I started with a story about these two Jews who passed away on the same day. Any recollection in the small town in Europe called Brisk? And the rule is that you're supposed to bury or attend to the body of the person who died first. But the person who died first was like a poor shoe salesman who lived his life in obscurity, and the person who died afterwards was like a big kind of macher with a lot of money, and the Chevra Kadisha, welcome, just pull up a seat. You can, thanks. The Chevra Kadisha kind of went over to his home first. Reb Chaim of Brisk got very upset, took his cane, he was an elderly man at the time, and he went over to the home of the, where the sort of wealthier Jew was being attended to, his body, chased them out and made sure that they followed the halacha. And we talked a little about Reb Chaim, about being someone who was really known for being, what's the Hebrew word for kindness? Chesed. So it actually, what's that?
I was wrong.
That's okay, chesed. And it actually is written on his tombstone. I got to see his tombstone in Warsaw when I was in Poland years ago. And it says on the top of his tombstone, Rav Chesed, the rabbi of kindness. Even though, if you ask people what Reb Chaim was really known for, most people know him as being this very intellectually erudite scholar who transformed the way Jews study Talmud to this day. But that's really one of the jobs of a rabbi, is to look out after those who might not have somebody to look out for themselves. And I started with that story because it was always assumed that if you learned enough Torah, you followed enough the mitzvot, out would emerge a more ethically refined person. But we've all met individuals who maybe have been through the system, but are not necessarily much more refined. So that's where the Musar movement started. Musar is Jordan, pull up a seat. I think that's available, actually. Musar just means instruction. Sometimes when you hear that word, if people cringe because it sounds like someone's going to tell you what you're doing that's wrong. But it's really about improvement and ethical development. And this whole movement began because if you don't focus on parts of the Torah that make you better in terms of personality, it might the other parts of the Torah might make you smarter. They might make you more learned and knowledgeable, but it may not necessarily produce a more ethically refined person. So that's what we're doing in this little mini course. And I do this every year before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur because that's what we're really supposed to be doing as we prepare for the high holidays. The great rabbi who started this movement was Yisrael Salant. They're all the same. And he lived later, but the person I want to study with you today is Maimonides. Now, Maimonides was a brilliant genius of a rabbinic sage who codified all of Jewish law into this book he called the Mishnah Torah. He actually wrote in the beginning of the Mishnah Torah that if you study this book, you don't have to study Talmud anymore. The rabbis didn't like that, but he wasn't trying to dumb down Judaism. He was trying to popularize it because studying Talmud could be difficult. Studying Maimonides is actually easier. It's not easy, but it's easier because he organizes things in a very structured kind of way. He has a section called Hilchos Deos, the laws of character traits, and I want to learn some material that has to do with anger. Okay? Now, we started this last week, but let's pick up right now. This is where we left off. Take a look at your handout. We'll read this in the English. Can we get a volunteer? Anyone here know how to read English? Yes, excellent. Just read loudly because we're recording this for posterity.
Not too far away. All right, the straight path?
Yeah.
The straight path. This involves discovering the midpoint, temperament, of each and every trait that man possesses within his personality. This refers to the trait which is equidistant from either of the extremes without being close to either.
Okay, so the Rambam believed, and where did he get this from? I mentioned this last week, that the right path in life is called the straight path, and the straight path is the middle road. Anybody know where he got that idea from? He attributes it to his, what was the name of the great Greek philosopher who Aristotle, famous golden mean of Aristotle. Okay, keep going, please. But he believed, by the way, that this was a Jewish teaching, that Aristotle sort of hit on a Jewish teaching. Please continue. Therefore,
the early sages instructed a man to evaluate his traits, to calculate them, and to direct them along the middle path, so that he will be sound of body. For example, he should not be wrathful, easily angered, nor be like the dead without feeling.
okay, so stop for a minute. What are the two extremes when it comes to getting really upset about things, which I want to focus on tonight? Getting angry about things. So one extreme is like you fly off the handle at any given moment. Like anything will set this guy off. Does anyone have any friends like that? It happens. Okay, maybe that's very extreme. Okay, what's the opposite of someone like that? Somebody who just seems like lifeless, like almost like they don't care. And what does the Rambam say? He says that is someone who's like dead, without feeling. Now that's not good either, because it's nice to be chill, and it's nice to be cool, and like, oh, nothing ruffles his feathers, but then it doesn't seem like you have any integrity, or that anything really bothers you. And it's really bad if you're a teacher or a parent, because if a kid does something that's inappropriate, and the parent, it doesn't get a rise out of the parent at all, it doesn't make them upset, and the kid sees that, then it's just going to like, oh, that's okay. If you get away with something too often, then it just can become embedded within our personalities. By the way, I'm writing a whole sermon for, how many guys are around for Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah? Anybody here? Rosh Hashanah? I'm working very hard on a sermon for the first day of Rosh Hashanah about habits. And there's been a lot of great research done on how to get rid of bad habits, how to start new good habits. It's complicated, actually. And the Rambam is very much a behavioralist. There's a great book called Atomic Habits. I think I mentioned it last week, by James Clear. And it's got a lot of good, like, Torah in there, so to speak. I'm going to be sharing some of that. So some of that's going to come out here as well. So those are the two extremes. So if one extreme is, don't get too easily angered and don't be dead. So then what's in the middle? What's in the middle between dead and everything upsets you, angers you? What's in the middle? It's hard.
Passion.
What's that? Passionate about what?
About things that deserve passion.
Good. What's your name again?
Talia.
Talia is very good. Passionate about things that deserve to be passionate. How do you know? Everybody's different. What sets me off is different than someone else. But how do you know when it's appropriate, when something, it's not an easy question to answer, by the way. I'm going to give you the rabbi answer. If the Torah tells you that something is a value and it's being trampled on, then that's something you should be upset about. If it's not something that the Torah considers important, that's probably something you should be letting go. Now that's hard because we are all developed based on our environments and our teachers and our professors in college, and they're not always aligned with the Torah. But the Rambam believed that the middle approach to every one of the qualities that we have in our personalities is always determined objectively by the Torah. The Torah is there, it's the gift from God to tell you what is worthwhile getting upset over and what is not. Now, I oversimplified it. It's not as simple, because how do you then react? And is this situation that I'm dealing with right now, is the remark this person made really against the Torah? It's not so simple always in real life. But in general, we try to really learn the Torah so we can understand what is worthy of getting angry over and what is not. And even though when you do get angry, that's not a cause or justification for yelling, screaming, name-calling, right? None of that is appropriate, and it's not effective either, because nobody gets taken seriously when they're attacked. We defend ourselves when we're attacked. So what I want to do with you tonight also is try to figure out, when it is appropriate to get upset, how should you express it? Now, easier said than done. How should you express it? You're upset, so you just say it. Yeah. In a way that doesn't make people feel attacked. How can you do that when you're in the fit, when you're in the moment?
I feel like that's really hard to do.
You can't do it in the moment. That's exactly, yeah? Jordan?
You have to recognize the issue, not the person.
Good, so that was my WhatsApp entry on my 40-day challenge today. If anybody's doing the 40-day challenge, I called it Play the Ball, Not the Man. is my high school basketball coach. When some guy got around me with the ball and got 2 points in on me, he pulled me over and he said, stop looking at the guy, look at the ball. The guy's going to do this, he's going to try to fake you out, he's going to move this way and go that way, but it doesn't matter, it's just the ball. I use that to talk about the issue. When you're having a conversation with someone or you're arguing with someone, focus on the issue, not the person. And that is a big issue that we're having in our society today because we have not successfully learned how to do that. We're getting way too personal about things. And I've seen that shift in politics where, by the way, if anyone has a chance, go on YouTube tonight and check out old presidential debates, old ones, like Walter Mondale and Ronald Reagan, okay? Like really old, like from the 70s and 80s. And it's so fascinatingly different than today. There's such respect and regard, and they actually talk about the issues. There is never name-calling. Nobody ever says anything specifically about the other person or their family or their religion, or it's like, and it's crazy. It's changed dramatically. And the other thing I said in my chapter this morning is, what's the greatest teaching of this? Who were some of the biggest debaters in the at odds almost on every issue? Hillel and Shammai. But how do we know they didn't personalize it? Well, they didn't marry each other, but their kids married each other, despite the fact, I didn't say this today, that they argued on issues having to do with marriage and divorce. So you understand, they had difference of opinion as to what Jewish laws were when it came to marriage and divorce. And even though they held different opinions, they still had their kids marrying each other. That's why whenever the Talmud or the Mishnah really records a debate between Shammai and Hillel, what does it say? It says the house of Shammai. Very good, the house of Hillel. It's like the academy of. So no one would think that like these guys didn't like each other. They really liked each other, they respected each other, but they disagreed. So that's the thing, Jordan, you're spot on, like try to get into the issue that's happening and not the person. Now that's hard. And I don't think it can be done, we're going to get to it soon. I don't think it can be done in a moment. I'm going to come back to anger soon. Let's just do a little more of this. You're doing so great. Go for it. You know what? I'm just going to keep reading a little. Is that okay? Because this way I can read it in here. So you should display anger only when the matter is serious enough to warrant it, to prevent the matter from reoccurring. Similarly, you should not desire anything other than which the body needs and cannot exist without. Okay, that's a very high level. Which is saying that you should desire physical things, but only the stuff you really need. Now, I mean, I would imagine he's talking, oh, you need a hand on? Sure. Please. Also, a person shouldn't labor in his business except to gain what he needs for immediate use. Now, this is not going to work anymore today so much. Because you can't, in other words, the economy doesn't really work, the world economy doesn't really work that way. You need to save. But some people go to the opposite extreme and say, I need, and they have plenty of money in the bank. Today I met with somebody. I ran to his office today in Midtown to ask for some help for MJE, as I often do. And I waited for him in his office. I said, where are you coming from? He said, from the West Side Kollel. I said, I wish you told me. I just came from the West Side. It's on 91st and West End. And I went to 59th and Park at where he works. And and I said, you're just getting to work now? It's 2:30. And he said, yeah, I'm able to earn enough money. So I spend like 3-4 hours every morning studying Talmud at the West Side Kollel. I'm like, wow, that's pretty holy. What do you do? I felt really good about asking him for money. But it's not like he has so much money. It's just that he has enough. He's a single guy in his 30s. And I don't know, that took a lot of discipline. Because when you're in that world, it's like, I just want to make... So the Rambam is saying here, it's good to want, but don't go overboard. Try to figure out, and this is very much up against the mentality of New York City, because we're just like, we want to all make it. And then to make it, you just got to keep working until you drop. But the Rambam is saying that's not really a Jewish attitude. Now he continues when it comes to charity. Don't be overly stingy, not spreading your money about, but don't be too frivolous with your money too. You're not supposed to give away too much to charity either. Talmud says, you should give a minimum of 10%, it's after taxes, and a maximum of 20% so that you don't end up becoming on the other side. Now that doesn't apply to a guy like Bill Gates, because he can give 95% and still have way enough money to live. So, but in general, for normal people, by the way, 10% would be like, he doesn't say this here, but that's the custom. So if you make, let's say, $100,000 a year, and Uncle Sam, we'll keep it simple, let's say Uncle Sam takes 40. Is that accurate? If you're making 100, does Uncle Sam take 40? Let's say he does. So then you're left with 60. What's 10% of 60? 6,000. So you're supposed to try to give $6,000 over the course of the year to charity. Some people say it can include like paying for classes, Torah classes, religious paraphernalia. If you really can't afford it and you're sending like kids to Jewish schools, some people include that in there. It depends how liberal you want to get on there. And it depends whether you can afford, to give, because it's very costly to live in this crazy town. And then he also says about the way you greet people. You should not be overly elated and laugh excessively. You have like friends like that? They're always like at a party. Hey! Hey! Whoa! Ah! Right? I'm like, there's no one else here. It's just me and you. What are you doing? Like, calm down. It's like annoying. But what's the opposite? What's the opposite?
Doesn't get up to say hello. Just
it's like lifeless. Like you have no. He says you shouldn't be overly elated and laugh excessively, nor be sad or depressed in spirit. Rather, you should be quietly happy with a friendly countenance. It says this in the Ethics of Our Fathers. Have a mekabel et kol ha'adam, receive everyone besever panim. Panim is a face, yafot, with a pleasant face. Now you'll say, well, let's say I'm not feeling like very pleasant right now. So again, behaviorally, and this is in the book on habits, the way you behave on the outside often affects the way we feel on the inside. Very famous teaching from the Sefer HaChinuch, unknown authorship, Acharei ha'pe'ulot nimshechu halevavot. After one's actions, follow one's heart. It's not being hypocritical to put a smile on, even if you're not feeling smiley inside. That was one of the chapters too. Smiling not only puts a smile on other people's faces, but it actually helps us. It releases certain chemicals and hormones, and it helps us get out of our funk a little. It's a quick fix. It's not like, you still probably need some therapy, but I'm a big believer in that, with the right person at the right time. But a little smile is nice. But like all the time is crazy. So the Rambam's very middle of the road. Whatever the two extremes are, figure out where the middle is. Now what happens if you're on one extreme? So the Rambam says the only time it's okay to go to another extreme is to get it back into the middle. So for example, if you are, let's talk about anger. If you're one of those dudes who becomes excessively angry too quickly, then put yourself in an environment, he says, that's going to subdue you and get used to that. And it's kind of behavioral. B.F. Skinner, has anyone heard of B.F. Skinner, a great behavioralist? It's called behavior modification, where you can modify your behavior by just repeating the desired behavior repeatedly until it becomes a more fixed part of your personality. Now, what I'm studying in James Clear's book is that you need to identify with the behavior. If you just do the behavior, it will help, but in order for the behavior to stay with you, you need to identify with the behavior. What are you thinking?
The cognitions that's present along with the emotions in order for the behavior.
Wait, say that loudly.
In order for someone to be attached to the behavior, you need to have the cognitive presence and attach your emotions in order to be physiologically connected to what you're doing. That's
Great. Now he goes further. He says mentally start seeing yourself differently. So you're not just involved in the verb, you're becoming the noun. In other words, let's say I have a goal I want to read more. Bless you. I want to stop watching so much garbage on my phone and I want to read more books. Let's say that's your goal this year. So one way of doing it is just to force yourself to put the phone down and put a book in. He also says, put the book on your night table and make it easy. Make it easy to do these habits. But he says, start thinking of yourself as guys, just pull in some seats. Welcome. Start seeing yourself as a reader. Because a reader reads. If you want to start working out, so you can force yourself to the gym, but if you start looking at yourself as a fit person and you value fitness and health, then, how could I not run if if I value fitness? And then your behaviors become really expressions of your identity. You really want to identify with the behavior. Okay. Now, so look at the Rambam. I'm going to continue. Look at chapter 2. The Rambam says, how can a person train himself to follow these temperaments to the extent that they become a permanent fixture? So he says, it's like boot camp. Repeat, like Pete and repeat, those two guys. You just kind of keep doing them again and again. You should repeat and perform a third time the acts which conform to the standards of the middle road temperaments. He should do this constantly until these acts are easy for him and do not present any difficulty. David Goggins writes about this in his book, if anybody knows David Goggins. David Goggins is David Goggins, you're laughing.
Hilarious choice.
Yeah, he's a crazy guy. He's one of the most impressively crazy people I've ever read about. Okay, he's a one of my sons works out to his videos. Yeah, and he is a guy who grew up with a really awful background. His father beat him, and he had no money, and he just decided he wanted to become a Navy SEAL. Okay, he wanted to be an elite Navy SEAL, and it didn't seem like he had any of the qualifications for it. He was heavy, he was lazy, he was overweight, he was not disciplined in any way. You know what Navy SEALs have to go through, and he became the Navy SEAL. He became an ultra marathon runner, ridiculously beyond any of his colleagues and in the Navy, and it was all sticking to a certain routine and repeating ad nauseum. Now he has an incredible amount of inner strength, this man, but he turned his life around and he's an inspiration to millions of people. So that's the Rambam. The Rambam's behavior modification, and he says, since the Creator is called by these terms, and they make up the middle path which we're obligated to follow, this path is called the path of God. He says, if you do this, you constantly, until these acts become easier for you, and then they don't present any difficulty. It's like going to the gym. When you go to the gym the first time, somebody says, you know what, you should get to a point where you could be benching 250, 5 reps, 10 reps each, 5 sets of 10 reps of 250. And you walk into the gym and you can't even do 150. So what do? How do you get to 250, 5 sets with 10 reps each? Well, if you start with that, you will get hurt. You'll be in the hospital and you probably will never set foot in the gym again. You have to take small steps and you have to stick with it long enough for those steps to resonate. Now the challenge is, and this is the research I'm doing for my Rosh Hashanah drasha, the challenge is you can't expect results immediately. And then the question is, what keeps you in the game? What keeps you when you don't see results? And that's why so many people, New Year's, the lines for the gym, to get on the treadmill, you got to wait 15, 20 minutes in the typical Manhattan gym to get on the treadmill. January 1, January 2, January 5th. February, lines are not so long. March, they're half empty. What happens? Because most people give up because you're not seeing results. And that's why every commercial for diets and every commercial for anything shows fast results. And it doesn't exist. I'm sorry, but they're all fakes. There's no such thing as a quick fix. There aren't real quick results unless you do something very extreme, and that is often unhealthy. And by the way, and the same goes with spiritual growth. I always get nervous when people come to MG who don't have much of a background and who take on too many things too quickly, because I know it's going to be short-lived. It needs to be gradual, it needs to be regular, and it's not always going to feel good all the time. That's what it means to be a person of faith. A person of faith sticks with things even when you don't feel it. And that's why when somebody comes on Shabbos and they say, Rabbi, I didn't feel it today, I won't be seeing you next week. If you take that attitude to everything in life, you will accomplish nothing. Because if you base your actions and your behaviors on your feelings all the time, you will never accomplish, not in your profession, not in your spiritual life, in your relationship with God, not in your relationships with other people. Marriage is the best example of this. Marriage is filled with wonderful days, and it's also filled with days that you just got to get through so you can get to the next day, which is going to be better. And that doesn't mean it's a crappy marriage. That just means that you're human. And that's why it's a lot of this perseverance is a very, very important in Jewish teaching. All right, dealing with anger. Take a look at page 2. Anger, Rambam says, is an exceptionally bad quality. Now, you're going to see why theologically anger is so bad. It's fitting and proper that one should move away from it and adopt the opposite extreme. He should school himself not to become angry, even when it's fitting to be angry. In other words, the Rambam is saying, Maimonides is saying that anger is so bad that you should never have it, which sounds like weird. Like, how could you never get angry? And didn't we say before, if you don't get angry over certain things, then you have like no conviction, you have no integrity? How are you going to teach your kids what's right and wrong? If you're a teacher, how are you going to teach your students? So he says, if you should wish to arouse fear in his children and household, or within the community, why do you want to arouse fear? You want to teach discipline to kids or to your household, right? Then if he's a communal leader and wishes to be angry at them to motivate them to return to the proper path, let's say a rabbi of a congregation, and his congregation does something really awful, and the rabbi's like chill with it, doesn't say anything. He's not doing his job. Rabbi Soloveitchik actually said that any rabbi whose community is totally cool with him all the time is not being a rabbi. If your congregants don't get upset with you once in a while, you're probably not doing your job. You're a politician. You're trying to just get everybody to like you. But that's not your job. Your job is to teach. And sometimes, did you always like your parents? No. Well, if you did, then they weren't doing their job. Okay? So, if there's a communal leader and wishes to be angry to motivate them to return to the proper path, he should present an angry front to them to punish them, but he should be inwardly calm. You should get to a point where you're not feeling anger internally, but you're displaying it externally. Because if you don't display some anger externally, they're not going to learn. But if you're experiencing it internally, that's really bad. Now, why is that? He should be like one who acts the part out of an angry man in his wrath, but is not himself angry. The early sages said anyone who becomes angry is like someone who worships idols. Now, why is it so bad to get angry internally if it's just showing that you're upset over a certain inappropriate behavior? It shows that you have conviction. It shows you have some ethics. Why is it a bad thing to feel ever anger?
Cloud your judgment.
It clouds your judgment. Good. By the way, does anybody know why anger clouds our judgment? Like physiologically? Like what's happening when we get angry? Like why do we get angry? Fight or flight. So we get angry because either the body has to basically send certain hormones so that we can either run away or protect ourselves. That's why we actually physiologically, when someone says something and you start feeling something. Remember the last time something really upset you so much? You started getting like sweaty, you started becoming like perspiring and getting all nervous. So you don't think as rationally. Your thinking centers are receiving less oxygen. There's less of a blood flow to the brain. And therefore, we often say and do stupid things when we get angry. Which is why one of my other entries in the 40-day challenge was learning from Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was not simply a great statesman, he was a great man. What he used to do when he got angry is he would write these letters. I called the chapter called Never Sent, Never Signed, Never Sent. He would write these angry letters expressing his emotions, and he would never sign them or send them. Be the equivalent today of like writing something really like expressing everything you're feeling and not pressing send, not texting that person. Which is why I always tell people, don't respond in anger. Wait. It'll be there. I know it feels so good just to get it. I have to share this now. But think about what's going to happen if you share it now. It's very hard to say it in a way, and I'm not so good at this. By the way, I'm sharing a lot of this stuff because these are things that I contend with, that I personally am challenged. I get very upset, and I want to just share it, and like it's going to solve the problem. The only thing that's going to do is going to make you feel good very temporarily, but it's not going to help the situation. If you really want to help the situation, display some whatever it is, but do it from a place of calmness. But you should look like you're angry a little, he says. Or else you're not going to be able to communicate to the other person that this is really upsetting you. This is very interesting, by the way. So he says, whoever becomes angry, if he is a wise man, his wisdom leaves him. If he's a prophet, his prophecy leaves him. The life of the irate is not a true life. And therefore, they have directed that one distance himself from anger and accustom himself not to feel any reaction, even to things that provoke anger, and this is a good path. Now, this is very interesting in terms of anger. It's a beautiful teaching. Does anybody know my favorite plague? You don't have to know my favorite plague, but my favorite plague is frogs. You know the frogs here, frogs there, frogs everywhere. So there's this medrash. It says, how did all these frogs come about in ancient Egypt? So there was this one big mama frog, and it came and it was going to like attack the Egyptians. And then when the Egyptians saw this, they hit the frog to like kill it, and it multiplied into 2 frogs. And when they saw the 2 frogs, the Egyptians started hitting the 2 frogs, and they turned it into 4, and they kept doing this until Egypt was filled with frogs. That's the medrash. That's what the rabbis teach. That's how the frogs came about. So one of the great rabbis asks the obvious question.
Why they keep hitting the frogs?
Why they keep hitting the frogs? The Egyptians were very smart people. They built the pyramids. If they saw that every time they hit a frog it multiplied, why didn't they stop? They were angry. You can't. There's some other force, and that's why, this is my only explanation for this weird passage in the Talmud that says, anyone who gets angry, it's as though he's worshiping idols. Now I understand getting angry is bad, but what does that have to do with worshiping idols? Ki'ilu ovdei avodah zarah. Can anyone think of a connection?
It's like a rejection of reality.
Thank you. It's a rejection of reality.
You're not thinking?
Well, you've become someone else, because it's not really you who's doing it, because you're not thinking so much. So that's true. What does worshiping idols have to do with it? So idol worship has a lot to do with a distorted notion of reality, of who is really in control. Because why do we really usually get angry at stuff, like regular everyday stuff in life? Because reality is not in line with my desires. And if reality is not in line with my desires, then what is it almost implying? Reality should be like I desire. But you're not God. The only being that gets to decide reality is God. And by you getting angry with reality, you're really saying it should be like me. It shouldn't be like God. It should be like I want it. Because if you really were okay with God running the show, why would you get upset at something? At all. Now, I know that no one is thinking this way when you get angry. What do you mean, why would I get angry? Because look how much I did for this son of a gun, and this is the way he repays me? That's all you're thinking about. But if it happened, it's because for some reason God wanted it to be that way. And if God wanted it to be that way, and I'm angry at that, what am I really saying is, I don't think God should be running the show. I think my reality should be dictating the situation and not God's. That's my explanation. Very great line in the Talmud that says that there are 3 ways you can tell a person's true nature. Bekiso, bekaso, ubekoso. It's great. Bekoso is a drink. Kos is a cup. And when it refers to drinks, it means real drinks, alcohol. You can tell a person's true nature when they get a little tipsy. Bekiso. Kiso is his wallet, the thing he puts in his pocket, money. That's another true test of a person's true nature. And Picasso, when they get angry. It sounds like Picasso. Picasso, when they get angry. Kiso, Koso, and Kaso. And these are things that reveal the not so wonderful parts of who we are. Now, I don't like to say that's who the person really is. Because the person really is a spark of God. We're a holy, beautiful people. And that's the way we should really see ourselves and other people. As an aside, I shared this yesterday on the 40-day challenge, quoted from the great Rav Nachman of Breslov, a lot of his teachings revolved around these 2 words, Nakuda Tova. My son actually wrote a song called Nakuda Tova. Nakuda is a point of Tov, of good. Everybody has Nakuda Tova. It's your job to find it. And every bad situation, and even miserable comment and insult, has an akuda tova to it. And theologically, he very much believed this was not just like a nice kind of, pop psychology way of keeping good relations with our friends, to always like find the good. That's a nice thing to say. He believed it theologically. Because what does the Kabbalah teach? The Kabbalah teaches that everything that happens in life is part of something that is sourced ultimately in God. So if you can take something, even a not wonderful situation, and find the Nakuda Tova, find a positive spiritual spark in it, then what it shows is that you believe that everything that happens is ultimately rooted in the divine. And if you can find something positive to it, because God's all positive. Now, it's been so corrupted down to this miserable person saying this miserable comment. But that doesn't mean that where it began didn't come from a higher place. So I think that's Rav Nachman of Breslov. He was a great Hasidic master. And there's a big movement in Israel today, especially of the Rav Nachman Hasidic Jews. They're the guys with the white yarmulkes and they're dancing around. They seem like very happy people. And they are, because they're constantly looking for the Nakuda Tova, even when things are falling apart around you. Yeah, Jordan.
When you were first talking about, when you rewrite, like, different idols and things like that, right? I immediately went Kabbalistic, and I was thinking about, our godly soul, our animalistic soul, in terms of, if we're our animalistic soul, the animals, the rage, the anger, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, obviously, combinations of like that. And impetus in terms of, the other all positive. But I guess the question is, how can we make sense of that when there clearly is Hashem's wrath that we see throughout, the Torah?
Right. This is very difficult, and I said this on Tisha B'Av when we were sitting on the floor in the next room, and we're mourning the destruction of the temple and anti-Semitism, persecution, the Holocaust. We are supposed to, ideally, and this is very difficult, and I would never say this to a person going through a really hard time, but theologically, we really believe that everything that happens is somehow for the good. Now, you have to be careful with that, especially when you're talking about something like the Shoah, or someone's own personal suffering. I would never say this to such a person. But that doesn't mean we don't believe that everything that happens was somehow necessary in order for God's good plan to become realized. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to avert pain and suffering and prevent a Holocaust or a genocide, or prevent pain or cure cancer. We have to do everything we can to alleviate suffering in the world. That's tikkun olam. That's another major Jewish imperative. But when something happens, it was somehow, we believe, meant to be. We could be angry about it because we're human. And from a human perspective, it's awful. And I would be careful with what I'm sharing with you, to be careful with how you process this and share this with other people. But if something happened, it was meant for us to somehow grow and develop from, both on the individual and national level. Because God didn't put us in this world to suffer. God didn't have to create us, we believe. And if he did, it was ultimately to develop and give us opportunities for spiritual closeness with the divine. And that's all good. So everything, even the worst thing in the world, is somehow there's a spark of godliness in it. I know that doesn't sound satisfying or even help explain. I don't really know why bad things happen to good people. I can't tell you this happened for this reason. I would never presuppose. But I do know that, and Rav Soloveitchik taught this, that we're supposed to take those situations and somehow grow from them.
I'm just curious. It's more of a thought.
That's why Rav Soloveitchik said that a Jew never asks why, lama. But you can ask, and you should ask, lema. Not why, but for what. For what greater purpose can this situation somehow propel me towards? And we may not always be in a place where we're doing that. I would never say this to a person if I came to pay a shiva call, God forbid, somebody lost a loved one. I hope you can learn from this moment in your life. No, right now they're just mourning. But at some point we look back and say, how am I growing from this situation?
So to pull this back in.
Because what doesn't kill us builds us. You've heard that expression. What does that mean?
Sure. To pull it back into anger, right?
Yeah.
So my issue is this. We're saying anger is essentially a bad thing.
The Rambam is saying your choice to become angry at something is bad. You should not ever experience it internally. There is a place for you to display it externally, but ideally it should never be experienced internally. Now, I'm not saying I've met anyone in the world who can do this. He's talking about the ideal of ideals. To get yourself to a place where nothing really angers you.
My struggle, what I'm really saying is my struggle is this, that we see examples of when Hashem is angry with us.
First of all, God doesn't get angry. God's not a person. Anger is a human emotion. God doesn't get happy, he doesn't get sad, he doesn't get angry. Those are all anthropomorphic. Talmud says, Dibur Torah v'lashon ben Adam, that the Torah speaks in the language of man, so we can understand. We would never know what was right or wrong if God just stayed the same in the Bible every time something happened. So when it says, V'chara api, and God's nostrils flared, he doesn't have a nose, and they didn't become... It's an expression to show that God disapproves of this behavior. In a very real way.
Right.
Because if it was very academic, then we wouldn't take it so seriously. But God doesn't get angry. God is just God. God's just this incredible light and force. But we want to understand what are God's teachings. What is godly wisdom? And you can't know that unless you know what would make God happy or sad or angry. But he's not actually getting angry or sad. He's just demonstrating that this would make him that way if he was a human. But he's not. It's light stuff for Wednesday night. It's getting late, and I want to leave you guys with some tips. I have here a couple of things to do some things to regain some control when you're getting angry. Okay, let's turn the page. Remedies. Number one, breathe, take a step back. We talked about that before. Waiting before you send the email, waiting before you send the text, show it to someone else. Just let it sit there for an hour and look at it after an hour. Get a cup of coffee, come back to it. That's simple. The Meiri, one of the early commentators on the Talmud, related that the rulers of Arabia testified there was one of their earlier kings, a very good ethical ruler, an honest and God-fearing person, who struggled with anger, and he gave a certain note with the 3 sentences I put in your packet. And he gave this 3 sentences to his servant and instructed the servant every time the servant noticed he was getting angry, hand me this note. And what did the note say? Remember you are created and not the creator. Remember we talked about that before? Why do we get angry? Because reality is not lining up with what I think should be. 2, you are flesh and blood. In the future you will rot and decay. That actually helps. It's a little harsh, but it's like, you're not such a big shot. You're just going to be in the ground like everybody else. 3, remember that you will not be loved tomorrow if you do not love today. I know that sounds very like 21st century, but this was quite ancient. Number 2, being dan l'kav zchut, taking into consideration the whole person. If you take into account the whole person who's angering you, it will help you deal with that person. That's what it says in the Mishnah Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers. It says, give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Now the word everyone could be understood in one way. Give everyone as opposed to just like your close friends. How come you give him the benefit of the doubt? You don't give me a benefit of the doubt. So the rabbis are teaching, give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Or he could say, Havedanes kol ha'adam. Look at the whole person. Because why do we get angry with people? You really wouldn't get angry with someone if you looked at the whole person. Because you then put the thing that's like angering you in context. Like this jerk who just made this comment is the same nice guy who a week ago was there when I was down. Or 2 weeks ago gave me a few bucks and lent me some money when I needed it. But I'm not thinking about that. I'm only thinking about the jerky thing he just said. So that's looking at the whole person, if you can do that. That's 2. 3, say something. If you see something, say something. Don't sweep it under the rug. Now I want to qualify that. You can't say everything. Because then you become one of those really annoying friends that's going to get a reputation of being overly sensitive. Everything bothers you. You have to suck up some things. But you shouldn't suck up everything, because if you suck up everything, it's going to fester. It's going to build. And the Torah says this explicitly. In the book of Leviticus, it says, Lo tisnat achicha b'levavecha, do not hate your brother in your heart. Believe it or not, there's a prohibition to hate your fellow Jew. You're not allowed to hate your fellow Jew. Now, how do you do that? How do you prevent yourself from doing that? It's in the verse. Reprove your fellow, which means say something when they do something to offend you, and don't bear sin because of him. What sin? So Nachmanides, who I quoted here, a great Kabbalist and Talmudist, said it's the sin of harboring hate. What's going to cause you to harbor hate? Sweeping it under the rug. You think that's the best thing to do because you don't want to have a whole fight. You don't want to be confrontational. We like to avoid confrontation. So just keep quiet. At some point, you're not going to be able to look at your friend. Now again, that's not so easy to figure out what's worth it to say something. You know how you know that? When you just can't hold on to it anymore without being upset at him or her. If it's something that's really still upsetting you, you have to say something. And here's a tip. And this is not a science. This is an art. Giving tochacha, which is chastising, rebuking a friend, is an art. Some people are really good at it. Some people are awful at it. Most people are awful at it. Because if you say to the person, you're such a jerk, you know what you just did? Or you don't even say the word jerk. How could you have done? If you say the word you, and by the way, this is really good. I learned this in couples therapy. All the MJ rabbis went for couples therapy. I don't mean with their wives. We went to this Dr. Gottfried, I forgot his name. I did it years ago and I got a whole certificate. I spent 3 days listening to this guy. He's a brilliant guy. He's done a lot of research, psychiatrist. And he's like the expert on couples therapy, and he has like all these studies and scenarios and films where he interviews couples and watches them, how they talk to each other, what works, what doesn't work. So he says anytime you use like the pronoun you put the other person on defense. Every time you leave that stuff on the floor, right away, even if the person knows they shouldn't have left it on the floor, and they should probably just be apologizing or picking it up and moving on, but now they have to defend themselves because you just can't be attacked without defending yourself because you have to live with yourself. Freud wrote about that. Every psychologist understood we have defense mechanisms so we could be okay with us. But you don't want to put your partner in that position or your friend. So when you're giving tochacha and you're saying, what you want to do is say, when this happened or you said this, it made me feel. It made me feel. No.
Oh, because it's about exactly that. It's very interesting.
Who wrote it? Can you find out, just send it to me? Because I'm always looking for more stuff on this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just more wisdom on this. You just said honey, when I find these items on the floor, it makes me feel like you don't respect my need for organization or my need for, that kind of thing. Because nobody could really fault you for feeling something. Except when my kids were little. And they would say that. And I would say, you made your brother... Well, he shouldn't be so sensitive. So as we get older, we kind of accept other people have feelings. Even if we think they're stupid feelings. But those are their feelings. And you have to kind of accept that other people are having those feelings. You can't say, well, you shouldn't have experienced that sensation, that feeling. But I did. Okay, call me overly sensitive. So giving tochacha, and by the way, never do this in front of other people. I know it goes without saying, but you just blew the whole thing if you say this in front of someone else. You want to do it privately, and here's what you want to do. You want to role play it a little with yourself. Think about how to say it, because you can probably anticipate the reaction. And it's a little of a chess game. Since you know what your friend is going to say in reaction, then come up with something that you think is going to get a decent reaction. Now, sometimes you want to run that by someone else. And without mentioning the name, because we do have rules of Lashon Hara, we're not supposed to speak ill of other people, so you might want to call someone and say, look, this person just did this. Here's the way I'm thinking of bringing it to their attention. How do you think that will be received? How would you receive that? How would you handle that if I said? Or how would you put it? How can I phrase it in a way? Because if you really care about the relationship, by the way, that's a really good way of starting. The only reason I'm sharing this is because I care about our relationship. I want us to be good and not upset. I'm really feeling upset about something. If you don't do that, it's going to linger. If you do that all the time, you're just going to be one of those annoying people that at some point people are just going to say, I'm never going to be good enough for you. And I have a friend like that who I felt like was just so sensitive about everything. And it was just so difficult for this person to keep friends. He had a very high bar for, he was overly sensitive, and that's difficult. It's difficult, but we're supposed to try to be sensitive and not judge people's feelings, ideally. Number 2, remember, we're on to like number 5 already. Remember that it's possible to control. This is the other thing I want to share with you. And turn the page here. Remember, we're done here. Remember that it's possible. I'm just going to give you 1 or 2 other things. Many people we respect have had anger issues, and they brought it under control. Anybody know? Famous guy who ran for president, terrible anger issues. You don't even know this, probably.
Carson.
Did you hear me say this, or you knew
Put it
this?
in there for you, man.
I put it in the book. So Ben Carson had awful anger issues when he was a kid. He wrote about this. He said that he lunged at his best friend when he was 14 with a camping knife. And he could have killed his friend. I mean, there are crazy stories. I saw this once. There were 2 guys a person killed another person over anger. I saw this also on Law and Order. There was a Law and Order, and I Googled it. They did it based on a real story. A kid who was a very good hockey player in high school. And you know this? And the scouts came out to see him. And there was a lot riding on it. And for whatever reason, the coach pulled him out of the game. And the scouts didn't get to watch him play. The father was livid. And he attacked the coach, and he killed him. He didn't intend to kill him, but he was brought up on charges of manslaughter. Now, I usually bring up this case on another class that I teach on free will, because the defense tried to argue that he could not be held accountable for his actions because he lost control. There was so much at stake for his son. It was like road rage gone wild. Now, the jury didn't buy it, and he went to jail for manslaughter. He didn't intend to kill the man, but he did. His actions resulted in the death of a human being. But that's how angry people can get. It literally causes... You ever see sometimes, like you go by and they look like they're going to kill each other. Got in the middle of the street because it was like and it's just crazy. It's crazy what these people are saying and doing, and the level that it's reached over a fender bender. So it's very dangerous, and it's really important to get under control when it becomes extreme. But even for most of us sitting in this room who are not in that extreme, we do lose friends over this. We lose friends because we don't know how to articulate our disappointment with others, our being discontent with another person. And it's just, I've been privy to family situations where I've tried to create peace with people, and it's just the saddest thing in the world, where parents and children aren't talking to each other for years. And I'm not saying it could have easily been helped, but it could have been helped, and a lot of it was the way that it was dealt with in terms of the... So one of the students of the great Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Simcha Meir Cohen, who was a great rabbinic figure in Europe, related that he used to occasionally see the Chafetz Chaim enter his synagogue at midnight and remain there for a certain period of time. The student followed his Rebbe one night and hid under the bench. And at midnight, the Chafetz Chaim arrived, opened up the ark, and began to implore God to help him conquer his anger issues. The Chafetz Chaim, he wrote the book on gossip, on not gossiping. And another student related to him one early winter morning, he found him prostrated on the floor, loudly rebuking himself about anger, and that this was something he was working on his whole life. Rav Nachman of Breslov, who I just shared that Nakuda Tova idea, looking for the spark of good in everybody and everything, he related by nature he was an angry person, and that he worked his whole life on this. So I'm giving you these stories so that you can feel like you're in good company. That this is not like something for, bad people. This is something for normal people. But it's something that we can work on and really get better at. And we can control this. So just to sum up, take a breather. Maybe put a little piece of paper with these 3 lines on it. Pull it out every time you get really upset. Read it. Because it puts you back in, it puts you in your place a little. Look at the whole person when considering how to respond to this individual or how upset you're getting. Try to think about all the wonderful things that this person has done for you, because that's the same guy who made the nasty remark right now, and we tend to forget that when we're upset. get it off your chest, and say something, and remember that you're not alone. A lot of much greater people than all of us in this room have been able to bring their anger under control. Okay, I want to leave you with a letter that the great Nachmanides wrote for his son. I gave this to you guys last week. I don't know if you read it. Really worthwhile. This is a letter that he wrote to his eldest son with the instruction to read it weekly. When his son left, basically went on his own. And it's such a beautiful letter. Some people walk around with this. They keep it in their pocket and they read it every week. It's a very, very beautiful letter that really helps refine us and allow us to really learn how to master and cultivate a personality, a type of personality, because if you become that kind of person that people just want to be around because you're reasonable, you don't fly off the handle, and even when things upset you, you know how to deal with it, you're just going to become a much more attractive person to other people. You're going to be a better, please God, spouse, parent, teacher, lawyer, doctor, whatever it is. And people will start opening up to you more because they'll feel less judged. They'll feel more comfortable sharing things if you start becoming that. And just to share one last thing that I said earlier in the class, it all has to do with the way we see ourselves. If you want a new habit you're trying to cultivate, to stay, and not just to, behaviorally just tack it on and do it occasionally, but it really becomes part of who you are, start looking at yourself as a calm person. Start looking at yourself as a respectful person. That's, and then, I heard the late and great Esther Youngrise. She said that she once met this young woman in Israel who was, this is many years ago, all tattooed and pierced up, and really leading a very unfortunately self-destructive kind of thing. I'm not saying everybody who gets a tattoo and a piercing is being self-destructive. I'm talking about somebody who did this in a very extreme way and was unfortunately addicted to certain substances. And the way she handled it was, she spoke to this person in such a high, like someone who was, she said, someone of your stature. It's like the Yiddish word is like pasnist. It's like almost inappropriate for someone of your stature to be behaving and living in such a way. So there are different ways of improving. You could say, I'm such a garbage person. I'm such an idiot. I have to stop doing this. That's one approach. The other approach is, I'm a high-level person. What's a high-level person? Like, I'm a person who values fitness. And so why am I noshing down on salsa and chips? I'm talking about myself right now at 2 a.m, binging on some Netflix thing. When I know I'm just going to feel like crap in the morning. Why am I doing that if I'm a person who values? Right? Because if you see yourself in a certain way, then your behaviors are going to be sort of evidence of it. And they'll be in line with it. And that's something that James Clear talks about a lot. So if you start looking at yourself as someone who's calm, who's reasonable, then I think that's going to also help curb some of the anger and help us, put it under control. And we all have our moments. I realized also, and I'll stop talking now, but I realized that I was getting angry a lot early in the morning because I would start my work and not get my cup of coffee and not eat anything for a while. Now they say intermittent fasting is really healthy for you, and a lot of the people are recommending doing more intermittent fasting in the morning, because that way, but you have to, he never was an expert on intermittent fasting. I listened to a podcast and I got all excited about it, and he said the best time to do is in the morning because you already haven't eaten, and the longer you go without eating, the better. It helps with longevity. But it makes you really cranky, so you got to be aware of that. Because I realized that I was losing it a little. I started seeing like a pattern, and Ezra, who I work with very closely, Rabbi Ezra, was like, "Did you get your cup of coffee?" Like one morning, he's like, "You didn't have a cup of coffee yet, did you? You're very irritable already." So the little things like that also matter. All right, we're going to continue next week. Any other comments or questions? Anybody want to share?
I'm curious.
Yeah.
A lot of what we're talking about today is like anger between person to person.
Yeah.
But is it the same teachings for like you could be angry at yourself?
Oh, angry at yourself? I thought you were going to say God. Yourself.
Well, I guess both, but because you were saying when the rabbi like would say like I'm so angry that I get angry.
So what I would say about, I think it's actually different when we get angry at ourselves. Again, like everything else, there's a middle of the road. Because if you're always upset with yourself, you'll never be able to grow. Because you have a self-defeatist sort of attitude towards you. Now, if you're always happy with yourself, you can't grow either. If you don't feel you have enough room, there's any room to grow, like I'm okay the way I am, that's not good either. So you have to try to find that middle of the road, but it's tricky because the studies tend to show that, like, I know this with like kids and parenting, that kids do much better when the positive behavior is reinforced, when parents say that was great as opposed to pointing out when they're doing bad. And we do that to ourselves a lot. We often critique ourselves when we do bad and we don't give ourselves a pat on the back when we do good. Now, when I was in high school, when I was in 9th grade, there was a rabbi of mine who came over to me to shush me during davening once. I'm still close with this rabbi, by the way. And I stopped talking, and I went over to him after shul and I said, Rabbi, I get it, I shouldn't have been talking and I'm sorry. But sometimes I pray pretty good and you never say anything. You only shush me when I talk. You never say when I prayed nicely. I couldn't believe I had the guts to say that to him. I was in 9th grade. And he didn't react. Came back later, like an hour later, and he says, my Hebrew name is Menachem. He says, Menachem? He says, you're right. I don't think I've ever said, and sometimes you do daven nicely. And I only shush you when you're talking. And I never, and I first of all, that went, it was a long time ago, and I still remember it. And I'm still in touch with that rabbi. And I think we do that sometimes. I know I do that. I'm a perfectionist and I fluff over when I've done something good and I don't celebrate it enough, and I'm very aware of when I'm messing up. And that's not good and those are not fun people to be around either. So it's having that balance. I've also been around people who think everything is always okay. They're completely unaware. And that's not good either. You can't really grow that. If you think it's like, okay, everything's okay. Not everything's okay, but you have to celebrate the wins. And that's what every successful person in business always says. Got to celebrate the wins. Because that's how, it's the positive feeling you have about what you do and who you are that makes you more successful. Not I got to fix this. Even though you have to fix that. That's a really great point in terms of how do you deal with yourself. By the way, what does it say in the Torah? V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. The Torah doesn't even command you to love yourself. It implies you already do. Because it's basically saying you're not going to really be able to love other people if you don't love yourself. And I don't know anyone who can. It's usually people who have problems forming real solid relationships with other people are having internal self issues. And that's why I just had this interview with Gedalia Fenster. He says we don't enter relationships to fix those problems. We enter relationships to have a partner and to have the joy of love and we can grow. But we don't enter that to fix those issues. We have to fix our own internal problems. Now I think it's easier to fix your own problems when you have a cheerleader. When you have someone who's by your side and is helping you. But you don't go into a marriage to fix the problem. You have to feel decent about, and that doesn't mean you can't get married until you're perfect. Okay, there's no such thing. But you shouldn't be looking to the marriage for that kind of tikkun, which is like the Hebrew word for fixing or healing. You have to do your own work. That's why the best prep for marriage, I always think, is personal healing and working on one's issues these kinds of discussions, getting therapy, talking to friends, working on yourself, that's the best way to prepare for marriage. Because the more good you are with you, the better your marriage is going to be. You know, it's going to come down to how okay you are with yourself to some degree. You know, yeah. I learned all this the hard way.